Hello friends, I'm Anthony, and in this photo editing tutorial I'm going to be walking you through getting started editing in Luminar Neo. It is an exceptionally powerful photo editor, but at the same time it's also very easy and intuitive to use. However, if you are just getting started on your photo editing journey, or with this software in particular, you might not be sure exactly where to start, what sliders do what. So I'm going to walk you through a photo edit in this tutorial, and by the end of it I'm pretty sure you'll have the confidence to tackle all of your photos and give them a good edit as well. So let's get into Neo and see what we can do. So I've already imported the photo that I want to work on into my catalogue, and I've done that by coming to the folder section, clicking the plus icon, and then navigating to the folder where it exists. We can also add individual photos that we want to edit just by coming to the add photos section, and we can click on add image, and there you're able to select individual photos for editing. Once we've got the photo selected that we want to work on, and that is denoted by this little blue outline that you can see here, we can either go into presets, and then Luminar uses its AI to analyze what's in the photo and make suggestions to what might be appropriate to apply to it. We can then come in and select any of the presets that it's offered up to us. Alternatively, we can go into a collection of presets that we choose. So I'm in the scenery collection here, and we can go for the clear and sharp cleanup. And then if we want to see what it looked like before and after, we can come down to this little eye icon here, which is the preview button. We click our before, just holding that down, and then release it to see the after. Before and after. So on one hand, presets are really good because they can help you get to a finished result very quickly. However, we're here to actually dive a little deeper and actually learn the editing ourselves, but they do also serve another useful purpose. So what you can do is actually backward engineer what the preset is doing. So if you want to learn what the tools are doing inside a preset, put a preset on your photo that you like the look of, and then come up here, and next to the presets option we have the edit option, and this is where we have access to all of the editing tools inside of Luminar. But because we've already applied a preset to this, all of the tools that have gone into making this current look to take it from before to after, they all exist in this edits tab here. So if I click on that, we are going to see that we have 4 tools making up this photo edit. So we have a develop tool, structure AI, enhance AI, and then we have the details tool as well. But let's discard these edits and start again, because I think we can do a better job. So the very first tool that I would recommend you start with is the develop tool. Now, if you are working on a JPEG, it will just say develop. If you are working on raw photos, which is what I would recommend, because your photo file will have more depth to it and therefore give Luminar more information to get its teeth into while it's editing. But for this edit, I'm working on a JPEG, so this just says develop at the moment. And the first slider available to us is the exposure. And as you can see from this, exposure literally just talks into the brightness of the photo, how bright or how dark the photo is. And you want to set this somewhere that you feel looks good to your eye. So for this photo, plus 47 looks about right. Now, as I was moving this up and down, you may have noticed that up in the top right hand corner, we have this colourful little graph that moves as I brighten or darken the photo. Now that is called the histogram, and that is a tool for enabling us to judge our exposure. We're not going to dive into it here, but one thing that's useful to know is that if I press the J key, that turns on what are known as highlight and shadow clipping warnings. So currently we can see all of this red here, and that is literally saying that currently everything that is red has gone to pure white, and that is something to be avoided. And equally, if I go to the left hand side, you can see that the bush in the bottom left, that starts going blue, and that's saying that those pixels that blue are actually pure black, and you also want to avoid that as well. And while this isn't an absolute rule for every photo, a good guide would be to have most of your data distribution to be falling towards the middle of the curve and just not clipping off left and right. So that's why I'm just boosting this up a little bit, and we can see that we have a nice spread of data here. The next slider down, Smart Contrast, as the name implies, controls the contrast in the scene. Now, I wouldn't recommend that you dive in and start making changes to Smart Contrast yet. I would actually leave that until you've made some other adjustments that I'm going to show you now. I would recommend you grab your highlights and actually control those. Usually, I find that taking my highlights to the left and bringing that down just helps to control the bright pixels in the photo. Equally, by grabbing the shadow slider and moving that to the right, That is normally beneficial for recovering detail in the shadows. So you can see in the bottom left hand corner here, previously when I reset that, those leaves are looking very black, very washed out, but by boosting that up, we start to introduce some information there. And then we can move the white slider up and grab the black slider and move that down. And just by making changes to the white and black point like that, we're reintroducing contrast. So just with these few changes through here in the develop tool, if we look at our before and our after, just by clicking on this eye icon here, which is the preview tool for this tool alone. So previously we looked at the overall preview of the before and after of the whole photo. Whereas when we click it in the tool itself, we just see the preview of before and after of applying that tool only. Now, I'm sure you were paying attention and you will have noticed that the eye icon actually disappeared when I reopened that tool. And I need to go over why that is so it doesn't trip you up during your editing. So any tool can be applied multiple times to your photo, and I'll go over why that's important later. But what that means is once you close the tool down, it actually moves the tool that you've made the adjustments to into the edit section that we looked at before when we were looking at the preset. And when you reopen that tool, you have a brand new version of it so that you can make new changes, new alterations with that tool. So because I closed the tool tab down, if I want to re-access it, I need to jump into the edit section. So let's have a quick look. So I can close this down, and because I haven't done anything to that tool, nothing's going to change there. However, if I jump into the edit section, we can see that we have access to that original develop tool with those adjustments that we made previously, but currently we can't see the blacks and the whites adjustments that we made. And if that is the case for any tool, you can see that we have a little chevron arrow pointing down here, and that just denotes the fact that we can click on that and it will drop down and expand with those tools inside it. Now, before I jump into the color section and we start talking about color temperature and white balance and things like that, let me just show you an alternative to what you can do here. Because if you're looking at all of these sliders and thinking, I'm already overwhelmed, don't worry, because Luminar has a really neat little trick for you. So what I'm going to do is actually just reset this tool and throw that in the bin. I can redo that in a second, no problem there. Now, if I jump back into the tool section, you can see that I've actually collapsed down all of these panels that contain the tools. Reason being, it's just a tidier way to work. But within the essential section here, underneath develop, we have this tool called Enhance AI. This is exceptionally powerful. Let me grab the Accent AI slider and I'm going to move that to the right, and you watch what happens to the photo. I'm going to press J on my keyboard to get rid of the highlight peaking warnings, and we can just look at our before and our after just with one slider. For me, this is one of the absolute power tools inside of Luminar Neo. You can literally transform your photo just with that one slider. And if you feel like your sky's a little bit tepid and needs a little bit of a helping hand, we have the Sky Enhancer AI slider as well. That's way too much in this example, so I'll pull that right down, but maybe a little bit's okay. Look at our before and our after. So if the develop tool does look a little bit daunting, a little overwhelming with all those sliders, then just park it for now while you build your confidence in your editing. And for now, you can literally just rely on the Enhance AI slider. Just grab the Accent AI slider, move it up. 100% is usually a little bit too much. Seems to be working in this example, but you know, 50%, 60%, a little can go a long way in enhancing your photos. But because of how fundamentally important for editing the develop tool is, because it has so many sub-tools that are very, very powerful and useful, I'm going to go back into that and just finish our learning of that before we move on to some other tools. So I'm going to reset Enhance AI. I'm going to jump back into my edit section. And of course, the develop tool is no longer there because we reset the edit. So I'm literally starting afresh, and look at how quickly you can make these changes once you know what you're doing. Boost things up, kind of get it where you want it. Little adjustments here and there. And once you do have your highlights, shadows, whites and blacks kind of set where you want, then yes, you can absolutely grab the smart contrast slider and just have a play around with that and just bump in just a little bit more contrast if you want to. So here's our before, here's our after. Let's recover those highlights a little more. They were getting just a little bleached out. And now let's move on from there. Color temperature is extremely important. Now, hopefully your camera has nailed it for you. However, if it has not, what you can do is actually grab the temperature slider, and if you move it to the right, you're going to kind of warm the look of the photo up, whereas if you take it to the left, everything takes on a cooler vibe. Now, in my opinion, the best thing to do at this stage of your editing is to get your color temperature accurate. If you want to go all crazy and creative and make it look really warm, really cool, you know, throw in a magenta tint, whatever, you can do that later in your editing. Initially, in this very first pass, the idea of dealing with this develop tool for the first run is to make the foundation of your edit look accurate and good. So going off with a crazy color balance isn't really what you want. So you have the ability to set this manually using these sliders, or alternatively, if you have somewhere in your image that you know should be a neutral grey, you can come over and grab this little colour picker icon here and move this over, and wherever that neutral grey should be, you just click on it. Now in this particular photo, I don't feel like I have a neutral grey. You could kind of argue, well, the road, the tarmac on the road, that should be neutral grey, and then click on it there. And then the whole photo is going to get a colour adjustment based on that. Perhaps there's a little bit on the boat down here should be a neutral grey, so we could click on that. And again, it's making adjustments to the temperature and the tint. However, I don't really like the look of this. A very subtle shift is all we need. Now, let's move on to the saturation and the vibrance. And these do very similar things. Boosting the saturation up, you're going to increase that intensity of all those colours. Boost the vibrance up, you're also increasing the intensity of those colours, the vibrancy. Rather than having to grab a slider and move it back down to 0, the quickest way to reset any slider is just to double click on the control point. And that's going to send it back to 0. So one thing to bear in mind with the saturation sliders is usually people who are just starting out with photo editing will tend to oversaturate their work. They will just pump more color into the scene than is actually there. So just try to be mindful of that. And if your photo does need an increase in saturation, like I feel this one does, you don't want to go too crazy with it. A little can go a long way. Okay, let's move on and take a look at sharpness. Now, to judge sharpness, the best thing to do is to zoom into at least 100% so that you can see what's going on. And the advice I'm going to give you is going to sound ridiculously obvious. Move the slider until things look good. Like if I push this all the way to 100, yes, we are sharpening our photo, but it's to the detriment of the overall image quality. And the reason I say that is we are starting to get haloing. And that is the high contrast fringes that you start to see around the edge of objects. Now playing with the radius, that's going to increase the size of those halos. So I'll use that double click method to reset it to its default of 50. And now I'm just going to grab the sharpness slider and just start bringing this back. You know, 50% is looking pretty good. And then we can scroll up to the eye icon so we can see our before and our after. Before and after. So we're certainly improving the photo already. However, in the sky, you can definitely see that we're creating this kind of speckled look going on, and that is digital noise. And you may have noticed the more we sharpened the photo, the more that became evident, and you don't want that. You want your sharpening looking good without too much digital noise, and the way to control that is just to jump into the noise reduction slider here, grab the luminosity slider, and the key is to bring this up to the sweet spot where we're removing that speckled look, but at the same time not destroying the details in our photo itself. Somewhere around 35 is fine for this photo. Okay, I'm going to zoom back out by double clicking on the photo itself, and that will zoom to fit. If you want to choose a different zoom ratio, we can click on this option here. We can go to 50, we can go to 200. An alternative method is to use your scroll wheel on your mouse, and that can zoom you out, zoom you in. And when you are zoomed in, you have this hand icon that kind of looks like you've borrowed Mickey Mouse's hand, and all you need to do is click and hold on the photo, and then you can drag around. Once you're done editing with a tool, all you need to do is just click the tool's name to close it down. And now let's have a look what our develop tool has done for us. Here's our before, here's our after. Now you'll notice that I haven't brought my little mouse cursor down to the eye icon, and I'm still able to show you the before and after, and that is because I'm pressing the / key on my keyboard. So although what we've covered so far might not seem like the most exciting part of editing, and it's not, it is actually the most foundational thing that you need to know, setting the base for your photo, because once you've got that right, everything else, all the other edits that you apply, the more creative stuff, builds on top of that. So if you can nail this stuff, you're winning. So you can either use Luminar's AI for a bit of a foot up by using the Enhance AI tool, or you can use the Develop Raw tool, which gives you a little bit more, a lot more control. Or you can do what I often like to do, which is sprinkle in a little bit of both. The next thing we'll look at is a really common problem for photographers, and that is framing, composition. You've taken your photo and you haven't quite nailed the frame the way you want it to, or potentially you haven't got your horizon line straight, and we can fix both of those things with the crop tool. So on the top of all of the tools here, we have the crop tool, crop AI. So you have the option to actually click composition AI, and then Luminar is going to make a cropping suggestion for you. However, I rarely use that, to be honest. So what I can do is grab the handle here on the bottom right corner, or you can grab any of these handles and actually move those in. Once you've actually got a smaller crop here, what we can do is again use our little Mickey Mouse hand and start to move that around to get the frame that we want. In this particular shot, I'm not really wanting to throw away too many pixels or come in from much of a tighter crop, but what I do want to do is try and straighten this horizon line. And you have a tool that enables you to do it here, or an alternative is to just have your mouse just on the outside of the actual crop rectangle, and then you can see that the icon suddenly changed to a rotation icon. And we can click and drag and move that up and down, and that is going to change the rotation of that crop for us. And then using those grid lines, we can match that up with the straightness of the horizon. And then if we're happy, we release and we just come over and we can click the apply button. Simple as that. In terms of the fundamentals of photo editing, the next thing I want to share with you isn't a tool specifically, but rather a concept. And that's the idea that when we're editing our photo, you want to get it looking good overall, and that's what we use the Develop Raw tool for, or the Enhance AI tool. But from there, the subsequent tools that we apply, we don't necessarily have to put them across the whole photo. We can be selective about where we apply them. So we'll take a look at a really useful tool, which is Structure AI, but it's more important that you pay attention to the principle of masking, which is where we're actually going to apply that effect. Let's take a look. So within our essentials tools here, we have Structure AI. So I'm going to grab this slider and crank that all the way to 100. And now let's come to the preview tool to see our before and our after with this tool applied. Here's the before, here's the after, and to be honest, it is looking actually pretty good through the whole frame. But let's suppose that we want to be specific with where we're applying this effect. So usually structure looks really great applied to a building. So if we just focus on the building itself and look at the before and the after, it's really bringing out a nice bit of punch to that. So what we can do is actually apply a mask that's going to say only put this effect on the building. And in this masking section, you can see that we have 4 different mask types available to us, and that is just different ways that we can apply this effect to the photo. And so if I grab the brush, for example, we have the ability to control the size of the brush. We have the softness, which determines how hard the edge of the brush is, and we also have the strength. So with that set to 100, we are going to apply the effect with full intensity. So if I want to put Structure AI just over the building, what I'm going to do is just click once. That's going to activate the masking feature, and now I'm just going to paint over the top of the building. I don't need to be too precise with this. And now as I let go, we can see the Structure AI applied where I painted that red mask before. So now we can see the before and the after, before and after, and you can see it is only being applied to the building. Now I also noticed that the structure tool was bringing out a nice bit of detail to this foliage that's pretty dark in the foreground here. But let's say that we don't want to actually apply that with 100% intensity. Let's say we like the effect, but we only want half of the effect. Well, the way to achieve that is pretty easy. All we would need to do is just set the strength of the brush to 50%. So now when I paint the mask over this area and I release, we're going to get the effect of Structure AI based on the settings that we've applied here, but we are only going to see 50% of that effect. So that is the equivalent of basically putting this effect on here with the amount at 50. But because we've used our mask here, we've been able to get 100% of the effect over the building and 50% over the foliage here. So here's our before and here's our after, before and after. This idea of being able to apply Luminar Neo's tools to specific areas of your photo using masks is just so powerful when it comes to photo editing. I've put together a comprehensive video all about how to use masks in Neo, so I'll put a link to that in the description so you can check that one out afterwards. However, for now, I'll just give you one more example before we move on. So I feel like the sky doesn't have as much impact in this photo as I wish it would. Now, I don't want to come in and do a full sky replacement, which I absolutely could, but I want to keep this authentic to the scene. So what I'm going to do is come into the Enhance AI again that we've already looked at, crank the Accent AI slider up, and straight away we can see we're getting a little bit more definition in those clouds. I'm also going to use the sky enhancer, but I don't want to push that all the way to 100 because, as you can see, the image is starting to fall apart pretty quickly. We're seeing all that speckled effect, and it's that kind of image degradation that we're going to see when we're editing JPEGs, whereas if we were editing a raw photo now, we probably wouldn't have the image falling apart like this. But I'm going to use a very simple mask now to introduce this effect into the sky, have it tapering off, and therefore we won't be over processing the rest of the photo. Let me show you. So I'll just bring this sky enhancer back down to a more reasonable level. And if I show the before and the after, you can see, yes, the sky is certainly getting a lot more dramatic. I do like it, but I don't like what's happening to the rest of the photo. For me, that's getting over processed. So we're going to use our mask to actually just taper this effect off through the sky. So one of the brilliant things with Luminar Neo is it has the ability to mask objects using its AI. So we can actually apply a mask directly based on the sky. We can use architecture, so we could have used that for the structure AI, but I just wanted to demonstrate how the brush works. But rather than use that, what I'm going to do is actually create a linear gradient, because this works really well from the sky. So literally we can click, drag down, and from where you start the click and drag down, you're going to have 100% of whatever the effect is. So the enhance AI that we created, 100% up here. You're going to have 50% where the dot is in the middle, and then it's going to taper off to 0 at the bottom. So this is going to create a nice fade of that effect. So now I'm happy with my mask. If I come back to adjustments, we're going to see that effect. So you can see the richer blue in the top, we can see more detail in the clouds, and that effect just fades off towards the horizon. And again, I've just closed that tool by mistake, so it's jumped over to the edits here, but no problem. Here's our before, here's our after, before and after. And that is so much nicer having it applied with that subtlety, where we have a nice linear gradient tapering the effect off into the photo rather than having it garishly applied to the whole photo. Let's jump back into the tools section, and we'll just cover a couple of other key tools. So we have the color tool here, and within that we can control the whole saturation and decrease that or boost it up. We can do the same with the vibrance, but I would actually recommend that you avoid making changes here, because as you saw earlier, these sliders also exist in the develop tool, so I recommend that you actually apply those changes there. But what is useful within this is this HSL drop down here, which represents the hue, which is the color, the saturation, which is how intense or how vibrant the color is, and the luminance, how bright the color is. And that enables us to go into individual colors and change them. So for example, the blue that we introduced into the sky here, I just feel like it's a little oversaturated. So we can come into the saturation slider here, we can come into blues, and I can grab that and I can actually desaturate the blue color. Conversely, I can grab and push it to the right and I can intensify that color. So in this case, I'm actually going to just drop that blue down ever so slightly so it still looks a little more real, and I also feel like it's quite cyan in this area as well. So I'm going to come into the hue itself, I'm going to come into the blue because that's the color I want to control, not the cyan, but I want to take that blue and actually push it more in towards that sort of purple color and away from the cyans. So I'm just going to bump it up ever so slightly. And now if we scroll up and look at our before and our after, you can see that we've desaturated it slightly and also shifted the color itself as well, but it's affecting the whole photo. So again, we can come in to our masking, and this time I'd like to apply it to the whole sky. So I'm going to take advantage of Luminar's AI masking. I'm just going to click sky. And how's that for efficiency? There we go. We have masked the sky successfully. So here's our before. Here's our after. That's a very subtle shift in the blues, but hopefully you guys can see what's going on there. I'll close that down and show you another useful tool, and that is the vignette tool. So I'm going to crank that all the way to -100 so you can see exactly what it's doing. We have a size slider here, and in the advanced settings, which I recommend you opening up, I don't think they're particularly advanced, I think they're necessary. You want to push the feather amount to 100 because that's going to give you a softer transition from where the pixels are dark to where they brighten in the middle. Now this tool is brilliant for controlling where your viewers look. So you can actually choose the subject, which means where do you want the center, the bright part of the vignette. So you could say, hey, the bridge is the important thing, the building is the important thing, or just the center of the photo itself. If you want to brighten the inner part of the photo, you can absolutely do that with this inner light slider as well. But I'd just be careful doing that because normally you've already set your exposure correctly in the first part of your editing, so you shouldn't really need to be brightening things at this point. But let's say you do, let's just push in a little bit of that. And then once you've got your vignette looking how you want it, you can then come back to the amount slider and then just reduce the amount, and so you're actually putting it in just with the amount you want. So here's our before, here's our after. If you think that's too much, we can just ease that off again. But the reason I push this to its fullest extent, and I recommend doing that with a lot of the tools initially, is just so you can see exactly what effect you're creating. And then once you're happy with that overall look, then you can bring the amount back to where you feel it looks better. Because had I have started trying to edit this vignette with the amount set at -59, let's say, as I move the size slider, it's actually hard to gauge exactly where that is. Whereas if we're sat here and I'm moving the size slider, it's so much easier to actually see exactly what's going on. So before and after of the vignette tool. Now, before I cover the final thing in the foundations of photo editing, which will be how to remove unwanted objects from your photo, I just want to very quickly show you some of the tools inside the creative section. We won't go into them in detail because it will just take too long, but they are so much fun just to play around with. And that is exactly what I encourage you to do. You're not going to break anything inside of Luminar Neo. If you apply something and you don't like it, you can just undo it. You can just remove that tool. But a lot of these creative tools are unique to Luminar Neo, and that's one of the reasons that I enjoy using it as a photo editor so much. Incidentally, if you don't have Luminar Neo yet, I do have a link in the description below, and I would really appreciate it if you would use that, because I get a very small commission from it and it just helps me keep creating this free content for you guys. You've got two options. You can either buy Neo outright or you can go onto a subscription model. Choice is yours. If you go for the subscription, there's a discount code at Neo and you're welcome to use that and save yourself a bit as well. All right, let's press on with the creative stuff. Okay, so let's close the Essentials tab, open the Creative, and there is so much that we can do in here. We can swap out the sky, we can add atmospheric effects like fog and layered mist, haze, that sort of thing. We can even add sun rays as well, which I've found so useful for my landscape work. And then you have things like the dramatic filter, which is actually an overall look that you can add to your photos, which can help to give your photos a nice crisp look. So here was our before, here's our after, and a little really goes a long way with these tools. So we could just push in, say, 18% of this. Here was our before, here's our after. The mood and the toning tools are fantastic for adding color grading and color looks to your photos. They're really easy to use. So for example, you can just click on one of these and it's going to remap the colors in your photo. So this is really great. Just have a play around with and see what you like. Now, just a word of caution if you are applying moods or color grades to your photos. If you're working on a set of images that's going to sit together, try to keep that mood or that color grade consistent through the whole set, because that's going to give your photos a more harmonious look and be more pleasing for the viewers to look at. If you kind of mix and match, it just smacks of amateurism and it's not going to look great. So by all means, have a play around with these and get a feel for what you like. But if you're publishing something online, a set of images, keep it consistent. I think I might go for Long Beach in this one, and I don't really want to use too much of this. I think we'll just go for about, I don't know, 20%. Let's go for that. Let's close that down, and we also have access to some really nice glow filters. So we have the soft focus, glow. Again, just grab the amount slider, push it all the way to 100 and just look what the effect is doing for you. Personally, rather than using the glow filters, what I like is a type of glow which is mystical. And those of you that follow my channel know that I really like this filter, and I'll put a little bit of it on most of my photos. Here's our before, here's our after. It just gives this nice, soft, kind of dreamy look to your photos. And you don't have to go crazy with it, you know, to that sort of extent. But if you just push in a very small amount of it, again, a little goes a long way. But now let me show you how to use a really useful tool, and that is the clone tool. So that's going to enable us to remove objects from our scene, and we do that by painting out one area by stealing from somewhere else. So let me give you an example. So let's suppose I want to see more of the river coming through here, and I just find these leaves a little bit distracting. So in order to get rid of this area here, I would need to replace it with some water. So all I do is look around my photo and think, okay, I could probably borrow some pixel information from here. So I click once, that sets my source, and now I can come and click and start painting over the top of those pixels. And as you can see, it's replaced what I was brushing with where it's sampling from that crosshair on the right. If you want to sample a new area, all you do is hold the Alt key or Option on Mac, come down to where you want to paint over, you just click once and then hold the mouse button down as long as you want to keep painting those replacement pixels over the top. It's as simple as that. Let's close that down. And that, my friends, is where we'll leave this as the basics of photo editing. So let's take a look at our before, holding the preview button, release for our after. Here is our before, and here is our after. We can click on the edits tab here. We can see exactly what tools we've applied to create this look. Here's our before, and here's our after. So let me leave you with a couple of final thoughts around the fundamentals of photo editing. It's not necessarily understanding the tools that's the important part, but more having a vision about what you actually want to achieve with your photo edit. So for me, what I felt when we did that initial edit, and I showed you those tools so far, was that I'd strayed a little bit too far from reality. I actually wanted a nice clean edit. So yeah, completely, I get really creative with my edits from time to time. But if I'm working on something that is a travel photo like this, my intention is more to be authentic to how things were when I was actually there. I just want to improve and enhance the photo. And because of that, I've gone back in and applied a couple of extra editing tools, the same ones that we've already looked at, just to tone down that color grade that we added just for demonstration purposes, and also just bring out some of that saturation in the sky because that was getting a little oversaturated. And now if we look at our before and after, I'm much happier with this result. Here's our initial unedited photo, and here is our edited Luminar Neo version. So here's our before, here's our after. So now we've finished our photo edit. What do we do with it? How do we save it? How do we share it? What are the best export settings? Well, that's what I'm going to cover in this video here. So why don't you click on that one and I'll show you the best settings for getting your photos shared with the world. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in that one. Bye for now.